Here we have Codex Space Marines and the supplement for the Dark Angels chapter for use with 9th edition of Warhammer 40,000. And if I just pull back a bit, you'll be able to see that I've been following the Dark Angels for quite a while, right back to when the army list was taken from this collected set of articles from White Dwarf. If I can just find the page, here we go. This was the Space Marine army list when I first started out. There had been some earlier ones in chapter approved, the Book of the Astronomicon, but I never managed to get a hard copy of that. So this was my army list to start with. And I fed through to Angels of Death, which was Blood Angels and Dark Angels. And I followed it all the way through the various editions. I know there is one missing. I couldn't find that for this video, so you'll have to bear with me. But today I'm going to look at what would have happened if I hadn't have been following the Dark Angels through all of these different editions. What would have happened if I got my Rogue Trader vintage army and then put it all away and forgot all about Warhammer 40,000 right up until 9th edition? Can I take my Rogue Trader vintage figures and make an army that's suitable for use in 9th edition? I'm going to start with the command element of my army, and here we have two Space Marine officers that came from a blister pack of 3 figures, which was released and to represent the 3 command officer ranks in the original Space Marine army list from the compendium. And there was a lieutenant who was second in command of a company, a captain who would command the company, and there was also a lieutenant commander who would be second in charge of the chapter. Now I'm going to use both of these actually as lieutenants, because sometime after this, but still under Rogue Trader, Games Workshop released another set of Space Marine captains, and one of those included a dedicated Dark Angels captain, which of course I bought, and I think I'd rather use him as my Rogue Trader vintage Space Marine captain. So here I have captain and 2 lieutenants. Now for librarians, I've got this figure, which wasn't originally listed as a librarian when he was released. He's amongst some of the first of the single pose lead figures. Yes, that's right, lead. During Rogue Trader for a long time, the figures were not only single pose, they were also poisonous. And the gaming without the risk of death and blood poisoning, it just wasn't Warhammer 40,000. But this guy is often listed as a librarian nowadays. I think he does look the part, so that's what I'm going to be using him as. But I do have also a specific librarian figure. Now this came from a blister pack of 3 such figures, and it was released at about the same time as the blister pack containing these 2 officers. So I've added him in as well. Gives me 2 librarians to support my army. And finally, I have a chaplain and an apothecary. Now these figures have been around for a very long time, so it's quite easy to add them into your army. One thing to watch out for though is the war gear options. There's certainly an apothecary available with a plasma pistol from this vintage, and that's not a current war gear option for an apothecary, so he would not be valid. So this one on the other hand has a bolt pistol and a chainsword, so he's still quite usable. And that completes my little command element. You'll notice there were no Tech Marines in here though. Tech Marines were available under Rogue Trader, but the backpacks they had were the standard Space Marine backpack and didn't have a servo arm on them. Nowadays a Tech Marine has to have a servo arm, so because one wasn't available under Rogue Trader, I'm not including it in this army. Having dealt with the command element of the army, I am now going to move on to the core squads that will make up the bulk of the troops. and you'll see here a tactical squad of Marines. These are 10 single pose lead Marines, and for initially they were available in blister packs of, I think it was 3 Marines, but then a while later Games Workshop for a short time released an actual set of 10 of them as a squad, and that is where most of these come from. Bizarrely, the squad set that you could buy didn't actually fit with the army list. You got the 7 Marines with bolters, you got a sergeant. This isn't the actual sergeant that came in that set, it's a different one, but there was a sergeant. And then they gave you 2 heavy weapons. They gave you this heavy bolter and a second heavy weapon that the squad shouldn't have had. The squad should have had a special weapon instead, and I don't know why they didn't put a special weapon in, because as you can see from this Marine with a plasma gun, special weapons were available at the time in single pose lead, and they could easily have put such a figure in. I'll just end by saying, yes, I know this piece on top of the banner pole is not from Rogue Trader. I added this to the figure a while ago, and I just couldn't be bothered taking it off purely for this video. It doesn't make a difference to what I'm trying to do here, so I will now just move on. And the second squad is made largely of multi-part plastics. The first of the multi-part plastic figures for Warhammer 40,000, RTB01, and you got 30 Space Marines for £10. Yeah, I'll just let that sink in for a moment while you think about what you can get for £10 now from Games Workshop, and it certainly isn't 30 Space Marines. So, you got enough Space Marines for a starting army for a tenner, and included in that were 2 missile launchers. I still think this is the best design of missile launcher for Warhammer 40,000 there's ever been. And you also got 2 flamers. Now this squad has a melter gun instead. That is another single pose lead figure that I've added into here, and that is because this army was going to have enough flamers in it already, and I decided to swap out the plastic figure with a flamer for a melter gun instead. And the sergeant, again, this is from RTB01, and all I've done here is I've taken one of the power fists that was also available in the set for adding to character models, and a separate bolter instead of a bolter that's on his arm like these are. These are built into the arm, those bolters, and Games Workshop seem to have gone back to that in recent sets of plastics. And the sling is just a very narrow strip of thin plastic yard. So that gives me a second set, and all of those are in Mark 6 armour, the infamous Beaky Marines. And then later on, towards the end of Rogue Trader, Games Workshop released the Mark 7 armour. And many of these figures are a hybrid of metal and plastic. They used a metal torso with plastic arms and weapons. And as you can see from the guy I've put a missile launcher on, it meant they were actually compatible with parts from RTB01. And that gives me enough for this squad by also adding in a single pose figure with a plasma gun, and this guy with a power fist as my sergeant, and I think these were called Storm Eagle or maybe Death Eagle Marines. Whether that was supposed to be a specific chapter or not, I don't know, but their armour matches these guys, and these came in a set of 15 Marines. All of them just had bolters. There were no special weapons, no heavy weapons at all in that set, so that's why I've had to take parts from different sets to get those. But that now gives me 3 tactical squads to make up the core of my army. Sticking with the regular Power Armour Marines, I'm now going to move on to a couple of the support squads that I've got, and I have here a 10-man assault squad. Now, Games Workshop did, like with the tactical squad, do a set of 10 single pose metal figures as an assault squad, but I didn't get that one. These were all acquired individually, and the weapon options that were available back then for Space Marine assault squads are quite a bit different to what they are now, so that set would not let you now make up an assault squad. What I've got is a sergeant with a power axe, who would have considered one of the special weapon marines under the Rogue Trader rules. But here he leads the squad because for special weapon support I have got 2 flamers. Again, single pose lead figures, so why didn't Games Workshop put one of those special weapons in the tactical box set? Nobody knows. Then I simply have as many Space Marines with chainswords as I could get. That figure, I think it was actually listed as a captain originally, but I'm just using him as a regular assault marine here. He's been demoted, and you will notice that they don't have jump packs, or at least not jump packs as we know them today, because back under Rogue Trader, the backpacks that these guys are wearing were considered to be jump packs, and your entire army could get them near enough. Even your Devastator squads could be bounding about the battlefield, leaping from cover to cover, and then firing heavy weapons when they weren't. And that brings me on to the Devastator squad, which is led by this guy. Now, this guy was a communications officer. There isn't a communications officer in the army list. There never has been, really. He was released far before any army lists were brought out, and Games Workshop were just making interesting figures. And I was wondering what I could use him as, and the answer seemed to be a Devastator squad sergeant, because his communication equipment could easily represent the special sensor equipment that such an officer carries. And now I've got heavy weapons. All of them got multi-melters in this squad, and that's because I wanted to show off that somebody in Games Workshop at the time of Rogue Trader must have really liked multi-melters, because we've got a Space Marine from a heavy weapon set with a separate multi-melter. We have the guy holding his multi-melter downwards. This is the second heavy weapon that came in the tactical squad, by the way, the one that shouldn't have been in there. Then we have this guy who's holding his multi-melter upwards in one hand. That's a strong marine. And then we have this guy who has his multi-melter mounted on a little tripod. So that's 4 totally different multi-melters, all available at the same time. And I don't know why they made so many of this specific weapon, but they did, and this little squad allows me to show off that. And then behind, I've just used 5 Space Marines from RTB01 again, and that rounds out that squad for 10 Devastator Marines and 10 Assault Marines. What would a Dark Angels army be without the Deathwing? And here I have a squad of Rogue Trader vintage metal terminators. I have a sergeant with a power sword, an assault cannon, and a chain fist, and then 2 Marines with Stormbolter and Power Fist. Now, these came from a set of Terminators that was released just after the release of the game Space Hulk. And I suppose if you wanted to, you could use some of the single-pose plastic Marines from in that for your Terminator squads, although it will limit your options greatly. You only had the standard Power Fist and Stormbolter, and a Power Fist with a clip-on heavy flamer in that set. So no Assault Cannon, no Chain Fists, and no Sergeants. But the set these came from had these 5 Marines in. There was also a Terminator Marine with a heavy flamer, and for his close combat weapon, from the ones I've used on these figures, you would have had to have given him a Chain Fist. And there was also a Terminator Captain and a Librarian. And under the army list at the time, that meant you couldn't actually make a full squad of Terminator Marines, because the 5-man squad under Rogue Trader, they either had to all have Power Fists or all have Chain Fists, with the exception of the Sergeant, of course, who had his Power Sword. But you didn't get 4 Power Fists, you only got 3 Power Fists in the set and 2 Chain Fists. So no squad from that one set. On the other hand, under the current rules, you can swap and change individually, and this makes up a valid Terminator squad under 9th edition. But these weren't the first Terminator Marines produced. These were. And so this is my relic Terminator squad, because all of them had a Stormbolter and a Power Fist. So again, I wouldn't be able to get a Sergeant for a regular squad. But I definitely wanted to include these in my army. So relic Terminators it is. In fact, this figure is one of the very first Space Marines I got. He's the only one of this single pose figure that has his banner pole still intact, so he's my sergeant. Then we have these two figures either side. These were multi-part figures. The back part, I've heard them referred to as beetle back every now and again. The back was separate and the arms were separate, so the arms could be posed ever so slightly. But again, you just had the Stormbolter, which is a lot smaller on this design, and a Power Fist. Now, there was also a third version, which was sort of a hybrid between some of these and this version, and that was when you first got a special weapon in the form of a flamer. I don't know if they actually had heavy flamers at that point, but I've not included any of those in my army because I think these 5 Marines are far cooler. Lastly, for my infantry squads, I have this 5-man squad of scouts. Now, these plastic figures weren't actually created by Games Workshop for Warhammer 40,000 initially. They were created for the spin-off boxed game Advanced Space Crusade. And you got 3 of these squads and half a dozen Tyrannid warriors in that. But they came out at the time of Rogue Trader being out. And the metal figures you could get at the time for Space Marine Scouts didn't really fit with what the rules are now. You had things like a shuriken catapult or 2 bolters, and in fact there were no scout squads in the Rogue Trader army lists at all. They didn't come in until 2nd edition. I think that's right. So I've used this squad from Advanced Space Crusade for my 9th edition army because they fit the rules better and they were available at the time, so as far as I'm concerned they do meet the rules that I am trying to follow in this army creation. Having finished with the infantry element of my army, I'm going to move on to the vehicle support that's available. Now, when Rogue Trader was being produced, Games Workshop had very limited capacity to produce and sell plastic kits, so they were really limited to metal models for most of the range, and that was made producing vehicles very difficult. You can imagine how heavy and expensive a lead Land Raider would have been. So that meant that most of the vehicles produced were small things like bikes, dreadnoughts, and the land speeder. Now, these bikes didn't have dedicated riders with them. Instead, you just got the bike. I think originally you would have got a left arm to be holding the handlebars, although I've not used those here. I got these off eBay and they didn't come with the arm. And instead, you use riders taken from RTB 01, which is how come I've got the Power Fist on the Sergeant and the Flamer on this biker here as the support Marine in this squad. There were also some character models available on these bikes, and so you did get apothecaries, chaplains and tech marines, all with dedicated rider figures. And you could also get an attack bike that had a sidecar. Again, for that one, you were supposed to take your riders from the plastic sprues available in RTB 01. And dreadnoughts. There were a lot of dreadnought kits produced under Rogue Trader. There were 3 different ones for Space Marines. This one really is the closest you'll get to a weapon option that still fits, at least with the Dark Angels, because it's got a las cannon and twin bolt guns. So you can say that's a storm bolter mounted on a power fist, and you can just count that as a twin las cannon. The other dreadnought options provided at the time were a missile launcher. I've got a couple of those, but you can't get just a single missile launcher on a dreadnought. So I decided not to include that. If I were, I would say it probably counted as a plasma cannon. And then we have the land speeder. Now this was released as part of a set of 3 models, strangely for different armies, because you got the Space Marine land speeder equipped with the heavy flamer and the multi-melter, although at the time it was a melter gun and a multi-melter. You also got what was then an Imperial Army tarantula, heavy weapon platform. Of course, the Imperial Army became the Imperial Guard. And then the third one was a squat mole mortar. Now, I suppose you could say the squats at the time were part of the Imperial Army, but why they would be then giving you a Space Marine vehicle with those 2 army models, I don't know, because if you only collected 1, you got models you couldn't use. But anyway, these were all largely metal models, which gave you some vehicle support, but later on, Games Workshop did finally get round to producing some all-plastic multi-part vehicle kits, and that's what I'm going to take a look at next. The ubiquitous Rhino armoured personnel carrier has been with the Space Marines, of course, since the early days of Rogue Trader, and I don't have the exact release dates. These may have actually been released before the Land Raider kit was. Even though the Land Raider actually appeared in the original rulebook, you couldn't get a kit of it for a while. But anyway, the Rhino you originally got in a set of 3, and that cost £10. So again, just consider that, combine it with RTB01, and in the early days of the hobby, you could get a fully mechanised army for £20. Now you can't even get a single squad for that, although the figures may be better now, but you were definitely spending less back then. And now I'll move on to, of course, the classic Land Raider. As I mentioned, this was in the original Rogue Trader rulebook, but the vehicle in the Rogue Trader rulebook wasn't actually quite like this, because that only had 2 las cannons, had a single las cannon on each sponson, and a bolt gun, not heavy bolters. The second heavy bolter is actually missing from this kit, sadly, but they brought this model out and they updated the rules to match it. And this originally came in a set of 2 Land Raiders. I did get that set. Sadly, both models were lost and or destroyed over the years, and I had to buy this one later off eBay, although I seem to have missed out on the massive price leap, because these are now going for several £100 each. Anyway, moving on to the last of the dedicated vehicle kits for the Space Marines released under Rogue Trader, we have this Predator. Now, of course, today you have options for heavy bolters or las cannons in the sponsons, and you can have an autocannon or twin link las cannons in the turret, and if you're in the right chapter you can get all the weapons in the turret. Back then, this is what you got. You had an autocannon in the turret, you had las cannons on the sponsons, and you had a bolter at the top of the turret, and that was it. Now, that would be the limit of the Space Marine plastic vehicle kits that you could get under Rogue Trader, if it weren't for a set of articles in White Dwarf called Modelling Workshop. And in one of those, they explained how to take a Rhino kit and turn it into a Whirlwind. Now, this wasn't an official kit, but the conversion must have been official because it was in White Dwarf. So I'm going to count this towards my army, and this adds the Whirlwind launcher onto the Rhino chassis by taking a 40mm square base and cutting it in half and mounting it in a turret on top of the Rhino chassis that is made from a front Rhino hull plate, or it could be a rear Rhino hull plate glued underneath to give it the angle. And then there is a plastic hard shell around it with an extra set of top and bottom hatches, then with stowage and an antenna on the side. and that gave you your whirlwind. There was also an article for a vindicator. I didn't make one of those. I probably will make one if I can get hold of another Rhino kit cheap enough. But until then, these are the vehicles that I have to support my Dark Angels army. And here we have my 9th edition Dark Angel Space Marine army, made entirely with Rogue Trader vintage figures in all its glory. Not a Primaris Marine in sight. Now you'll notice that the power armor figures I have actually rebased to 32mm bases, and the Terminators have been rebased to 40mm bases because that is the current standard for those figures. Back then they were all on 25mm bases, but that is the one concession I've made to the new rule set. I may do some more videos along these lines. The Imperial Guard, Eldar Craft Worlds and Harlequins were available. Chaos Marines and Demons were available. And some Tyrannids. I think you can just about make a Tyrannid army. And also Genestealer Cults. They were all part of Rogue Trader. For now though, I hope you've enjoyed watching me reminisce over what figures used to cost. And thanks for watching.